up, y'all? Y'all are listening to Living Corporate's flagship podcast. If you didn't know, Living Corporate helps organizations build employee engagement and market trust through data analytics and data transformation, our e-learning platform, and brand marketing storytelling. We're so excited for you to be here today. The conversation you're about to hear is going to connect the dots between employee experience and go-to-market effectiveness. If you're not ready, get ready. Here we go. Speaker, executive, thought leader, DEI practitioner, Arthur Chan. What's going on, man? How you doing?
Hey, Zach. Thank you for having me. Super excited to be here. Trying to do, the best that I can. I know, with everything's happening in the country, everyone is just, really trying to, just survive, right? And really navigate all these uncertainties. So yeah, trying to, hang in there the best that I can. How are you?
You know what? I'm doing about the same. For those who don't know, my wife and I recently welcomed twins this past April.
Congratulations!
Thank you. And so we're fighting between these naps, man. I got these two newborns, and I got another 5-year-old and a 2.5-year-old. So we just try to make it as well. You know what I mean? Blessed for sure. Mm-hmm. But very tired. And then, when you compound that with the state of the world, you get a little, you can be a little nuts. Give me a little nuts, man. Listen, I'm excited to have you on.
That's just a lot.
Yeah, yes, no, 100%. Look, I'm excited to have you on. Truth be told, we were supposed to do this some time ago, mm-hmm. And then just life. I remember, and so I'm glad we're actually able to finally connect now. Let's talk about your journey, starting with your education. Why clinical psychology as a focus?
That's a very interesting question. To me, back in the day, I was when I was trying to choose a major, for my undergrad, I was thinking, okay, what do I want to do? I'm not the stereotypical Asians, and definitely not good at math. So I always was hey, you can use me as an example to kind of dispute that kind of stereotypes. So, STEM is definitely not something I ever thought about. And I was always interested in human natures, why humans think, feel, or behave in the way we do. And I'm actually particularly interested in psychopathology, really studying quote unquote abnormal behaviors, why people behave in a way that quote unquote, again, using clinical language, deviates from, the social norms, right? Because it's just fascinating. So that's why I, after college, I decided to, go to grad school to pursue clinical psychology. It's just to really, kind of part of it is really fulfilling my own curiosity. But, along the journey, when I actually talk to people, really trying to understand their life circumstances and really trying to understand, the struggles, whether it's emotional or, psychological, that kind of issues, it really opened my mind, right? A lot of the things is even when we talk about depression or anxiety, right? Of course, there's an individual components because that's how we feel. And it's also how we perceive or how we interpret things around us. But environment actually plays a very, very important role in terms of how it affects or impacts someone's mental health. So that's what really drawn to me. And that's where I, decided to have my career there. But soon after, practicing as a psychologist after a few years, it just put on a lot of emotional weight on me. And then, my own mental health was wasn't really good, wasn't in a good shape and whatnot. So kind of, trying to explore, what I wanted to do. And that's how I actually stepped into the DI, space for the first time. It's actually during my practice as a psychologist in a hospital where I see the needs of people, for example, who don't really speak the predominant language, right? Then how do they actually get services, right? How do they get culturally sensitive therapies and whatnot? And that's really what drive me to kind of blend clinical psychology and DEI work in the first place.
You know, at the top of that, you said, top of your answer, you talked about using you as a someone to kind of like not fit within the stereotype of a focus on STEM. I'm curious, like culturally, and like for your family, was there a pressure for you to be in a STEM space more explicitly?
Thank goodness, no. But I would say that my dad always wanted me to study something like more business related, or he wanted me to be a lawyer. That like, well, this is like, jobs that are more stable. They like, kind of like guarantee incomes. The typical things that I feel like a lot of like older millennial parents would say to the children, right? I always look for jobs that are stable, that can like provide for you, right? Like you can have your dream, but you also have to, be in touch with reality, in terms of like your career trajectory and what really gives you like, a sense of stability going forward. So yeah, initially they were like, oh, okay, what are you going to do with that? With a psychology degree? I was like, well, I don't know. Just let me finish college. Like if I decided to, further my study, I'll do that.
My follow-up question is, because, there's a term of armchair psychologist, and I'm armchair psychologist. And I do believe like so much of this language has been normalized to the point where everyone is self-diagnosing or trying to label everything. Do you find it a need to like cut that part off and not necessarily diagnose people that you engage, or is that part of kind of just what you do by default as like a trained actual psychologist? Like talk to me about that and just how you interact, like not even as a DEI practitioner, just like out in the world, like because it would be hard for me, I would imagine, if I had that level of training and education, not to be like, okay, this person's probably blah 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 blah, and then like to kind of help me navigate, like what is that like for you?
Well, I think with the background in clinical psychology, I think there's a fine line that I always have to remind myself, right? Like, 'cause especially when I'm in an organizational settings, I have to remind that I'm not here as a therapist, right? Because it's like I'm not here to really, help you with like your emotional struggles and whatnot. Like I can, give you some guidance and resources, but my goal here is not to diagnose you, right? Like, because within the organizational setting, like my role is to really understand what concerns you have, right, that impacting your work or your well-being. So I would like focus more on that. But if I notice someone that have like, some, pretty obvious depression and anxiety symptoms, I might just name it. But of course, I'm not diagnosing the person. I wouldn't say something like, hey, I think you have depression. Or I say, oh, maybe, based on what you share with me, it seems that it really impacting your daily life, right? Your daily functioning. Like, have you consider seeking professional help? So I think that's also help in terms of like doing DEI work, because for a lot of people, a lot of like the work stress and whatnot are really tied to like organizational culture. So I think, having that knowledge definitely helps in terms of like helping myself, looking at like the situation or the quote unquote problem more systematically. But at the same time, it also equips me in terms of like how I communicate with the person, right? Like not based on my own assumptions, but really trying to understand the other person, what they are going through. So I think that empathy, definitely helps in terms of like, relationship building and whatnot. And really getting to understand, what are the issues confronting the person in front of me.
We started off, as how you doing, and you talked about just like scary uncertain time. There's tons of it. There's executive orders coming in left and right. Many of them looking to, from my vantage point, Arthur, like just undermine anything that has to do with helping people. Right? If it's a program that's there to help people, especially those on the margins, those things seem to be they are under attack. I'm curious, like, what are you holding in this moment as it pertains to like these administrative policy decisions and like the work that you do, as well as like the landscape of like just people operations work?
Well, I think with like, all the, anti-DEI executive orders, I think a lot of people, especially marginalized people, are definitely, impacted the most, right? Like we're not gonna, sugarcoat it in any ways because DEI is kind of like a lifeline, based on like its evolution and whatnot. So I think like the dismantling of DEI is basically definitely erodes trust, especially for organizations that decided to scale back, right? But again, when we talk about organizations scaling back on DEI, we really have to think about whether they're like changing the terminology to avoid scrutiny, or they are actually, kind of really scale back DEI programs and initiative as a wholesale. I think there's the differentiation. And I feel like, a lot of employees are not particularly upset about organizations, for example, changing DEI to, culture, belonging, community, opportunity. I don't think people are particularly clean on terminology per se, but they're really focused on what the organizations are actually doing, right? To really just keep up the promise that they made back in the summer, of 2020, like the murder of George Floyd, and all the like racial reckoning and whatnot. So I think people are really focusing on, transparency, whether you are doing what you promised to do. And B, whether there's like, accountability, right? Like you can't just say, hey, we're going to do this and do that, but you basically, keeping people in the dark, like not being transparent about like, what kind of initiatives you're rolling out and how you go about it, whether there are like, any sort of like, for example, roadblocks, right? Or whether you meet, the DEI goals and whatnot. So I think, the scale back on DI, the rollback generally, definitely give people a bad taste in the mouth. But I think employees, what they're really, really looking for is like how the organization's going to pivot, right? Or how the organization's going to continue to do the work.
There's something to be said about like the face of the work shifting or changing, or the titling, or the nomenclature shifting isn't, I agree. That's not really the concern or the problem. It's the quality and like just the substance of the work. Like, are we actually doing the work to make experiences better or not? Right? Like the external facing or the superficial pieces. I think employees understand that titles and nomenclature changes all the time. So like that's not really, from my experience as an employee, as well as like as someone sitting outside of organizations as living corporate, I don't like, that's not really the concern. The concern is, okay, what is the substantive work being done, right? And I do think, and I've said this before, it's like there's a part of me that I think in this season, like, and people losing their jobs is not okay. It's not cool. Like we all need money to survive in a capitalist context. So that is not what I am saying. However, for the sake of the industry and the integrity of the work, I do believe that we're in a really good pruning season, because there's going to be a lot of this work that is very much the theater of it, the drama of it, the pointless, meaningless gestures, a lot of things that ultimately just serve capitalism but don't actually serve employees. Like those things being done away with, I think is good. I really do. And I know, and like I've been told that sounds a bit harsh, but I mean it. I think it's a good thing that we're in a place where only certain types of this, only that everything, it won't stay. Because to your point, like in 2020, during the murder of after the murder of George Floyd, like a lot of the stuff that was happening was really performative. And like, we've seen so many articles, right? We've seen so many articles and like points of research that like show that, those pledges that people were making, like they never actually came to pass, that a lot of those jobs were like just hot air, like no one was actually doing any real work. And that isn't to say that certain things did not also happen that were positive, but I'm saying like, man, like I like the idea of this being a bit of a proving moment, a testing ground. We're applying heat to a space that has a lot of really fraudulent actors in it. Do you feel like I'm being unfair?
Oh, no, I think you're totally, spot on this one. And I think we can even see it, and, after, the anti-DEI executive orders, right? Like, because even though with the executive orders, we know, well, there's a lot of language, right? A lot of talking. But when we really look into it, what they're really talking about, what they are like, explicitly spelled out that's illegal is around identity-based preferencing, right? Identity-based preferences, or what we call diversity quota. It's just that there's no additional guidance in terms of like what's constitute as like DEI, or what kind of, DEI work, or what kind of DEI policies that they don't like about, right? It's like, it's just a blanket statement. Like, I hate DEI, right? And the only thing that they can like, actually push forward is like, you can't do any sort of identity-based preferences. But as we see, the trend is that, companies like Target, or other organizations, they kind of leverage this opportunity to scale back DEI wholesale, right? Like, they are actually, people say, oh, they are like preemptively complying, right? I see it as like, they actually do way more than that. They're not just preemptively, complying. They're actually trying to use this moment to scale back everything, right? And I think that is the dangerous part, right? Like, you get to like pick and choose in terms of like what you want to do, by just, literally, taking this opportunity.
And what's interesting about even that, right, is, and it's so many people have continued to say it, you just said it as well, is like, some of these organizations, like, they didn't want to do a lot of this work anyway. They didn't really want to work with some of these people anyway. They didn't like these programs anyway.
Right.
And so now, when they see any legislation or any policy that says, oh, well, don't do this one piece, to your point, they go, oh no, y'all, I'm sorry. They made us take away the entire program that supports Black and brown entrepreneurs, or this entire program that provides additional leadership support and opportunities for Gen Z talent, or talent from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And it's like, that's, to your point, that's not even what those orders were saying. It just said, hey, basically, don't exclude white people, because that was the orders really were so high level and are so high level and generic, really to speak to issues that don't really exist. And like, that's so much of what we're seeing in this administration, where we're going to manufacture a problem and we're going to say that we solved something that isn't real.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to, act like we're beating back this boogeyman that never existed.
Right.
And so, to your point, what could have happened, for Target's a great example. Target had an opportunity to say, hey, they said that we can't be racially preferential. We can't exclude different people. Okay, great. Now let's take our programs, look at it with a fine tooth comb. And if there's anything that they could say is being exclusive, let's amend that. But we can continue forward. We'll make it very clear that we're looking to serve everybody. Make it very clear that we're looking to do X, Y, and Z. And they could have continued on. And maybe they wouldn't be in the position they are today, right?
Exactly.
Like it's just so interesting. I think this also highlights the reality of needing diversity at every level of your organization, because so often, and I'm not in the room, right? So I don't know. Something tells me, though, that there aren't a bunch of Black and brown lawyers combing over policies and procedures at these companies. Something tells me that these rooms are largely homogeneous. They probably all look very similar, but it's like, hey, like, having some diversity of genuine representation so that you can have diversity of thought is important. Because in any other situation, like, Arthur, man, think about this. Like, if a law comes down and it's like, hey, this thing is going to impact how we make money. Like, you're going to need to take out this ingredient in your plastics. If there was a law, something came out and said, you need to take out this ingredient in your plastics, or hey, plastics can't have this particular component. No legal team is going to go back to their business owned unit and say, hey, don't use plastic no more. They're going to say, hey, we're going to follow the letter of this directive. It doesn't say that. It says that we can just take this out and take this out, and we could maybe replace this. They're going to look to be as technical and semantical as possible, because they're looking to follow the letter of the law. That's what you get a lawyer for. You get a lawyer to help make sure that you're doing the technical thing. And it's so interesting that only with people initiatives on DEI stuff do we throw out the baby with the bathwater. And that's because there's a desire to not do it.
Exactly. And I think like you definitely highlight like the essence of it, right? Like a lot of the time, like when we talk about like other like business operations or business initiatives, they are super careful about it, right? Like they wouldn't just take no for an answer, right? They would be like talk to lawyers, consult like, all the experts and whatnot. They would make sure they get to do what they want to do, right? We see it from time to time. Look at AI, look at like AI legislation. Like people are like super hyped up about it, right? They would do everything to minimize government intervention and regulations, right? But why they can't, apply the same, energy and resources on DEI? And that really speaks volume, right? And then I feel like that's the thing that organizations often think, oh yeah, it's out of our control. Because we can see organizations playing victims here, right? Like even for super big companies, right? You're just playing victim. It's like, well, it's totally out of our control. That's not really, what we intend to do. It's just because of all these executive orders, we are being pushed to the corners. But you're like, no, right? Like there's like exactly to your point, that's what lawyers are here for, right? Like you can change the language, but you don't have to change the essence of the work that you're doing, right? There are many ways to go about it, right? Like instead of, hey, since we can no longer use like, any sort of like identity based preferences, right? So you can think about, okay, how can I create policies like through an intersectional lenses, right? Like, so instead of like single out, like, oh, this is for Asian people, this is for Black people, right? You can think about, okay, what are the shared struggles, right? What are the shared concerns that really impacting employees? And we go from there, right? There are
Right.
a lot of things that we can do that can really benefit everyone, but also still like instead of treating everyone the same, you are actually looking into, okay, what are the shared struggles, how we can prioritize it, right? Because it's like when we talk about equity, as we all know, it's different from equality, where it's like giving everyone the same. So equity in essence is basically prioritization, right? So when you like think about it that way, you won't like just so easily be like, oh yeah, let's just not do DEI. Let's just go back to the way we were. Like, there's just many ways to go about it. Like, people are just making excuses for themselves.
What do you think, you know, going back to this earlier, so we're seeing rollbacks, we're seeing challenges. It's not like there aren't organizations still trying to do a few things, despite massive rollbacks. And I also believe, and this is part of like I've talked to several leaders, right? Like over the past 7 years of living corporate, and those who are a bit older than me, right? And they say, look, this work is cyclical. Like just even like HR work is cyclical. Like the spirit and the energy of the attitudes, they're never constant. I don't believe that the landscape of 2025 will be the landscape of 2027 or 2032. I'm curious though to get your perspective on, based on where we're at, like what models of just people operations, employee experience, diversity, equity, inclusion, what models do you think will sustain and persist, and stay effective coming out of this season?
I think what would really stay is like really do some more kind of like structural equity audits, like we kind of like touched upon earlier. Like for example, like really like trying to assess like whether there are like pay gaps, right? Because these are not like race-based focus. I mean, it's just like really just getting a sense of whether people are being paid equitably, right? Like so that is something that we can do like with or without like under the banner of like DEI, right? About like opportunity or leadership pipelines, or like how do we try to like mitigate bias like in interviews, performance reviews. These are the things I think that we can continue doing. But I think the trend that we will be seeing is that we have to kind of, unfortunately, go back to like the business case for DEI, right? I'm actually a strong advocate for like the moral case for DEI, right? Because I think that's the foundation, and it's better to have leadership or people in the senior management to be socialized with the idea early on. Because I think, the business case for DEI, most people already know, right? Like people know, like, all the slogans, right? Like diversity is like good for you, right? Like it's like improves like innovation, it drives creativity and whatnot. People already know. So I think what I'm seeing, at least in the near future, is like for a lot of like DI initiative, like they will continue to build on like the business case for it. But at the same time, I think the perspective will change a little bit. So instead of thinking about like what are the added benefits, I think it's important to highlight what are the potential risks
Yeah.
if you fail to do that, right? Like it could be legal risk, right? Like just because there's like anti-DEI executive orders or like recent Supreme Court ruling about like kind of make it easy, for a reverse discrimination, even with this legislation. But the essence of EEOC is still there, right? You still can't discriminate based on like, orders like protected categories, protected characteristics, right? So even if you say, oh, I'm going to take away like DEI, but it doesn't mean you can blatantly create policies that discriminate people, right? Or it doesn't mean you can just, just ignore all this like workplace, like violence and whatnot, right? So I think going forward, I would see, companies may actually have to focus more on like really thinking about like what are the legal risks and also the reputational risks of like inaction, right? I think that would be, the trend.
Yeah, I agree. I think operational risks have to fall in there too, right? So, and I'm of the same mind with your broader point that it's going to be things in my mind that are more objective, that are more data centered and driven. I don't know if like the leadership workshops and like some of the softer pieces of work are going to survive. And that's not even necessarily wholly because of just anti-DEI sentiment. I think we're just in a late stage capitalist society. So like, if you think about even the way that training exists today, like training is not the same. Like when I remember like a decade ago, you would take a half day and go take a training and be out in a workshop or out in the field doing whatever. Companies are not looking for you to be away from your tasks for a day or 2 days or 3 days. I mean, like you think about even like executives go on retreats, like the quote unquote retreat might be like 2 or 3 hours, right? It's not, and that's your senior leadership. And so I think there's the spirit of just, hey, whatever needs to be done, it needs to kind of happen while you're working, right? And so, and I think the same thing when it comes to just this space of productivity, the pressure to always be on. I don't think that some of these things that are just not very clearly tying back to revenue or risk mitigation are going to make it, right? I mean, and that's why, honestly, like, look, straight up, that's why with Living Corporate, we're really focused on data transformation. We do organizational audits and we do like data transform, like we can like ingest HRIS data, operational data, customer experience data, and we can build out all these custom views. And then we also have an e-learning platform, but it's very much like Spotify. Like just like you have Spotify in the background, you can use our e-learning platform in the background because the nature of the work of just the world of work is just much higher pressure. I'd love to understand and hear your perspective also just on like all of this is happening, right? Like in the foreground with folks losing their jobs, layoffs are happening. You talked a little bit about it earlier. Generative AI continues to be like on top of everybody's mind, despite all these points of research that show that generative AI is degrading infidelity and it is increasingly expensive and it continues to grow more expensive to maintain and expand. What do you think is the future of work as it relates to AI, right? Part of me wonders, Arthur, like, part of me is like, I think that we're going to come into this weird part of society where everything's automated and there's just a bunch of people just at home not working, right? But then another part of me goes, I've experienced AI in real time when I've been like, hey, what's 1 + 1? And it says it's 7. So it's hard for me to believe that like it's actually going to be able to do all that. And so I have my own fantasies of what I think is going to happen. But I'm curious to get your perspective. Like, where are we going with this thing?
Well, I can't really speak on like AI very broadly, but I can talk about like AI, in the context of DEI, right? So I think one of the things is like, I don't think DEI can be replaced by AI, even though, like, to your point, like, even if we like really look into data and be like really data focused, right? Because it's like data is just part of the story, right? It's the human connections that really actually make DEI work. And I don't think AI can replace human emotions. We're definitely not there yet, right? Because it's like, even when we talk about AI, it's basically what they call the term, like a language modeling, right? It's like it's not like you're actually talking to a real person per se. So I think there's still a long way to go. And but there's some concerns around the AI and DI for sure. I think the main thing is that like if it's left, unchecked, like AI will replicate bias at scale, right? And they can like easily, like to your point, automate, but automate something negative, right? They can automate exclusion, right? Screen out people and whatnot, like create like even more barriers to access and all this stuff. So and also I think like AI is also pretty good at masking, discriminatory outcomes and whatnot, because it's like when we talk about AI, is we can assume AI can think independently, right? That's how they want to brand it, right? But at the end of the day, we know AI are created by a bunch of people, humans, right? And we are all susceptible to biases, right? So I think the problem is that like how we like take a step back and really think about how do we have like, really monitor AI, along the process, like throughout the development, right? Like from like how they learn about information, like and whatnot. Like that would be a good starting point to really look into whether like, there are biases that actually kicked in. Yeah, so I would think, even with AI, I think DI practitioners definitely play a very important role in terms of like, for example, we can partner with data scientists to really interrogate training data, right? And flag any sort of like algorithmic harm. And really push for like ethics councils with like equity lenses, but like that goes beyond just compliance, right? Because I know there's a post that's been circulating on LinkedIn. It's like just because something is legal doesn't mean it's ethical, right? I think that's really speaks volume, and that's the reality. And sometimes things that are written into law are actually just to protect the dominant groups. It does very little in terms of like really protecting people who look like us, right? So I think that is also the reality that people really have to, really have to acknowledge, right? Because if you don't know what this legislation is about, what their intent to do, sometimes you just like, just buy into them and you're just like, oh yeah, they're here to protect us. But you really have to think about who they're actually protecting, because we are not all created equal. Like as much as we want to believe that's true, that's not true. So I think really like a lot of like, monitoring and a lot of like iteration, really trying to go through and look at whether there are like systemic bias during like, the training process, like, I mean, for the AI is definitely crucial. And I just think, people worry about, DI or HR being replaced by AI. I always say to people, well, that would be like a far, far future that would happen. Like the AI has to be super sophisticated, right? Because just as simple as like really understanding people's struggle, I don't think AI can really do that, right? They can do it, or they can like kind of understand you from like quote unquote a cognitive perspective, but they don't have emotions after all. So they can't really give you that empathy, right? They can say things that you want, but at the end of the day, I'm just talking to an AI. They don't really understand exactly how I feel.
No, look, Arthur, I'm right there with you. It's scary though, because we're seeing people create communities where they dating AIs. You know what I mean? So, and here's the thing, what's so scary about this moment is so much of that stuff, that chat-based, like generative AI it's just mirroring you. Like it's telling you the things that you want to hear. It's
Exactly.
affirming you. So that's why you find it so like intuitive and nice and warm, because it's just it's just reflecting you back to you. And it's a spooky time. And to your point about how AI is marketed, Living Corporate, we're working with some folks. We're going to be rolling out like a demystifying AI series, because so much of this space and this work, AI is presented as like a real, like what you think about in the movies, like Jarvis within Iron Man, or or like the AI in Terminator. Like it's presented like a actual, like true artificial intelligence, when in reality so much of it is just code, right? And human beings are really predictable. We're much more predictable than we'd like to admit. And so what we're saying, where we think of AI is going to be able to cure cancer and create like this utopia, it's like, hey man, like that's just not what this technology is. But so many of us are just not technologically literate. And when you present technology like this to a bunch of older executives whose first priority is creating additional value for their shareholders, they're going to leap on that, because their goal isn't some utopian perfect society. Their goal is to just make as much money as possible. So let's use this AI. Yeah, and let's save money. And even though AI, like more systemically, is expensive, if you're telling me that this will give me my green light to cut my most expensive resource, which are human beings, then I'm going to do that, because that's what I'm going to do as an executive. So I can come back at the end of this quarter and say, here's our profit margin, right? And so, we're talking a little bit again about like this tech and the future. In the background of all this is like Gen Zers and Gen Alpha, who are coming into the world of work. I'm curious, like, what do you think the future of work looks like for the next generation? Because like I foresee a world and space where a lot of these people are not looking for 9-to-5 jobs, where they're looking to maybe be a contractor, where they're looking to maybe not be in the space at all. Like the illusion, the veneer of family and investment and all of that stuff, I think that is washed away, Arthur. I think people see what it is now. So but I'm putting myself in that position. Like if I was to be graduating in like 2026 or 2028, I don't really know how I would feel about work. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I would definitely have difficulties, understanding what work means, right? Because it's just so chaotic. I just sometimes feel, like the next generations, I feel really bad, like that they have to come into a world that's just full of chaos, right? Like, but to your point, I think work's gonna look very different, right? Because it's like I think each generations, not to overgeneralize, but like each generation have their own characteristics, right? In terms of how they perceive work, how they perceive traditional hierarchy, how they understand power, right? Or how they use power, right? Work very differently from previous generation. I'm a millennial, so older millennial, so I'm kind of still have the the ideas that like I have to work hard, right? Like you can't call it quits so easily. There are some values that passed down from our parents, right? That is already implanted in your head. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, like I definitely think like my generation care a lot more about for example, inclusion in the workplace, right? Or the way we communicate, right? For older folks, they prefer to talk to you on the phone. But for me, if my colleagues call me out of the blue, I'll be like, I'm not going to pick that up because I don't know what you're calling me for. I'm working on something. Can you just give me a heads up, or like go onto my calendar and make an appointment? Why calling me out of the blue? Like, I'm not prepared to answer any of your questions if you have any questions for me. But I feel like, for the next generations, it would be even more different in terms of like, the preferred ways of communication and how they really connect with people, right? Just based on my experience interacting with Gen Z, I feel like the next generation is definitely craving a lot more authenticity, like in leadership, right? They don't like things that just top down, right? They want an explanation. They want the rationale behind decisions, right? They don't just want to be, oh, I'm just here to execute, right? I'm just here to take orders. Like they're not going to do that. They really want to know, why are you doing this, right? And I think for the next generation, my observation is that they really want to be part of the decision making process, right? They don't just want to be told what to do. They want their voices to be heard. They want their expertise to be acknowledged, right? I think, and the other thing I can think about is flexibility, right? Like I know, like there's like still a lot of ongoing debate about like remote work, hybrid work, or like RTO, right? But I think like for younger generations, they definitely appreciate more about having that flexibility, right? Like, because everyone works differently, right? Like, I'm more like an introvert, so I perfectly fine working from home, right? But I'm also can do great if I have to interact with people, right?
Sure.
And then one last thing that I can think of is that I don't think they are particularly cling on the idea that like hierarchy is everything, right? I think for my generation, sometimes when we speak truth to power, I think we're still kind of hesitate a little bit, right? Should I say this? Should I say that? Like there's a lot of back and forth, right? Okay, what are the risks? What are the benefits, right? Like why do I have to even say that, right? Because that's the environment that we grow up, right? But I feel like for younger generations, there's just so much shit being thrown at them. Excuse my language.
It's all good.
So I think they already learn, right? Like everything is just like like kind of a means of control, right? And I felt like they already seen how the past generations deal with it and what led up to what we're facing at large right now. So I think they are smarter about like really challenging the status quo and being vocal about like what they perceive as like injustice or illogical.
Look, I'm right there with you. I think that for all of the things that they would tell, look, this happens every generation. Oh, this next generation is going to be the disruptor. Da, 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 da. I do think that that you got to consider Gen Z and Gen Alpha, like the context within which they're being raised, like what they're seeing, what they're experiencing in their households, their patience and tolerance for certain things. It's not going to be there. Millennials, like we learned from our Gen Xer and our baby boomer parents, like because we saw that hey, they did work a job and they did keep their heads down, and a lot of them were able to make somewhat of a decent life for themselves. But then some of us also experienced and saw our parents being laid off because we started seeing that too. But now, if you think about Gen Z and Gen Alpha, they're experiencing and seeing their parents having to work like 2 or 3, underpaying jobs because they don't have a job as an HR manager or a sales executive anymore, or whatever the case is. Like they're experiencing something different. The economy that they're growing up in, and so the pressures and the expectations they have, and frankly, maybe even the angst that they have, is just going to be completely different. And so I agree with you. And I'm really curious, and this is probably a part two, Arthur, for another time, but I'm curious about like our organizations even thinking strategically and proactively about that. The spoiler is they aren't, but they need to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's like, I feel like age or generations are always like the least thing people think about, right? But we actually work with people from different generations across all course of life, like every day, right? Like there are organizations that actually have 5 or even 6 generations, right?
Right.
But people are like just like, oh, well, we treat everyone the same, right? But no, like we are not the same because like
we're not the same.
Our upbringing's so different, or even like, our exposure or the way we acquire information, obtain information is so different, right? For older generations, back in the day, they didn't have internet, right? Whatever they know about what's going on around them is through news or newspaper, right? For millennial, we start to looking stuff online, right? And then for Gen Z or like Gen Alpha, like they have like their own way of getting information, right? Is it like, for example, TikTok, right? Or some other apps that they use. I mean, I'm too old now, so I can't even speak on that because I'm stuck in like LinkedIn and just Google breaking news, right? Like this is me as a millennial. So I think, with people like, because I feel like information is liberation,
yeah,
right? Like if you know what's going on, if you can see through like, just the superficial layers of things,
The bullshit.
right? If you like, yeah, if you see through the bullshit, then whoa, this is not gonna work with us, right? So I think that's also why people are so worried, or organizations really, they try more energy trying to suppress information circulation than anything else. And that's why true equity scares them, because once people know about how decisions are made, once people know how an organization operates, once they have that institutional knowledge, they fear people are going to quote unquote rebel against them. So I think, but to your point, that's a long way to go. And I feel like that's why, organizations just refuse to talk about, oh yeah, how do we create, a workplace culture that actually benefit to our future generations that will eventually take over everything. They don't even want to think about that, because they just want to, continue to protect what they have, their status, their power. And I think it's just not a really smart way to run a business. If you really want to think about long term, right, what's going to happen in 20 years, 30 years, or 50 years, right? Like, so if you really think about sustainability of the organization, you can't just turn a blind eye and not talk about generational differences.
Man, Arthur, it's been a pleasure, brother. We're coming up on an hour doing this thing. I want to respect your time, but we got to come back and do a part 2 soon. Again, I'm so thankful and appreciative.
We'd love to.
Thank you. I'm just so glad we're able to connect. We have each other's math, so that's really good, and just able to chat. Man, before we let you go, where can people learn more about you? Please take the time, plug any project you're working on. The floor is yours.
Well, happy to connect with everyone on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Listen, for those who might be tuning in live and relate, talking to Arthur Chan, DEI practitioner, speaker, consultant, overall dope person. Make sure y'all check out the link in the show notes.
Not as dope as you, dope.
Oh, come on, Arthur. You're making me blush, brother. Look, we'll catch up. Till next time, y'all. Peace.
Living Corporate is a podcast by Living Corporate LLC. Our logo was designed by David Dawkins. Our theme music was produced by Ken Brown. Additional music production by Antoine Franklin for Musical Elevation. Post-production is handled by Jeremy Jackson. Got a topic suggestion? Email us at livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and living-corporate.com. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned.